Well, welcome to another lesson of the Focus on Agility CMS course. I am Marcelo Lewin, the Headless Creator. As always, get a hold of me right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. Today, my guest presenter is back. He's done other lessons, which you've watched already. Joel Vardy, he's the CTO of Agility CMS. And today, specifically, we're going to be focusing on localizing content, what locales are, the difference between that and translation. So having said that, Joel, welcome.
Hi, Marcel. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you back. Thanks for joining us again. So let's jump in and let's talk about what is the difference between localizing content and translating content, or is there a difference?
Well, the way I like to think of it is, you might want to present the content on your front ends in multiple languages for people who literally speak different languages, but you also might want to have different content just for people that are potentially maybe they speak the language, but maybe they're from different regions. So, they speak different, even within different states in the US, you might have slightly different messaging that you want to put on your front end. And you might have, maybe there's a different version of the page or some content for, British or Canadian English versus US English, things like that. And you just could have different versions of your brand for different regions or different markets that you want to put out there. So really setting up locales is just a great way to kind of segment your content by any differences in language that you have.
And locale is a combination of language and region, it sounds like then, right?
Yeah, and you can kind of mix and match that as you need it to kind of set that up. So you might have, for instance, if you can see right in my address bar here, I'm looking
We're
at
not showing
this
your
content.
screen here. Let's go
Right.
ahead.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Perfect.
I can see my screen. Why can't you see my screen?
Now we
So
do.
you see here in my address bar, I've got ENUS. So that to me
Right.
says that that's meant for English in the United States. But you could just say this content is for EN,
Right.
for English, like general. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of mix and match that.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind about locales, right, is not just about translating the language, but like you said, maybe you have a different messaging for, let's say, people in Texas versus people in California, right? Slightly different, and you can use locales for that too, correct?
Absolutely. And we've seen, and depending on the brands that we've worked with, some people have, anywhere between maybe a couple different languages that they support or 3 or 4 different regions, all the way
Right.
up to some folks have like between 40 and 50 languages that they support.
Sure.
So there's a lot of different variations there.
Yeah, I definitely have clients that have like 40, 50 different kind of regions and stuff, and it can get crazy. Yep. Okay, cool. Well, having said that, for those of you watching live, type in any questions for Joel you have in the chat. I'll ask Joel. Joel, it's all yours, and I'll jump in with questions.
Great. Thanks, Marcelo. First thing I want to do is just take you into the settings section where we can actually turn on and set up our locales. So I'm going to click into settings and we'll go right to the locales setting here. So you have to be a manager to have the manager permission to see this. But now you can see I've got 2 locales set up currently, one for English, which is specific to ENUS, and I've got another one for just basic French, and it's not tied to a region. So that's all that I have. I could create more. So it's as simple as, setting, hey, what's the name and what's the code? But now once I've done that and set up another locale, all of my content and pages are going to be kind of categorized by that. So I have to specify that when I'm working with them. So you can see when I'm in the content section now, I've got a drop down here that says I'm currently looking at English, and I could switch between English and French. So let's dig into an actual list to see what that looks like. So in my list of blog posts, so I've started actually for this one, this is actually using one of our trial accounts with the blog setup. So that this content has been pre-populated. And if I go into each one of these, I can see, yes, I'm viewing this content in English. And I currently actually have an app running in this model that is the Translate app, which is going to make it easier for me to translate content. And so now for this particular blog post, if I switch while I have it open to French, it will actually take me to the version of this post in French. And if I didn't have a version in French, it would offer to allow me to copy it over from my English values, which would bring over everything, including things like images and things like that. But now that I have this Translate app running, I can go ahead and maybe I could manually translate it if I wanted to, but I can just click this Translate button to go through, and it'll take all the text fields and it'll translate them from English into French. And it'll go through and do that for all of the stuff that I've got in here, including my HTML. Okay, of course, I have the same attachment that's on here. So, again, whatever model that I have set up for me for this item, that's what's going to get translated and go across. And you're going to want to sort of pick and choose which fields actually get translated.
Quick question for you on that, because I see you have audiences there, and there you
Yes.
also have like countries. So what's the difference between your locales and then this audiences?
Yeah, great question. Audiences is what this is what I was using for a personalization demonstration, where we
Ah,
had content that was being directed and specific versions of different content that would be directed for different audiences. So, and this is a case where I might have content that's in multiple locales, but then within that locale, I might want to specify audiences for that
I
language.
see.
And this was just one of the examples for how to do that. So that's a really great question. And
Cool.
you can get really complex if you have different regions for locales, different audiences, and then within there, different demographics that you want to segment your content by for personalization. And that's a whole another concept. But just sticking with localization here now, I've got this translated. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. So now this item is actually existing and it's got the same ID. I'm going to switch back to English and show you that this ID will not change. Um, so it's ID 112. Okay, so this allows me on the front end to actually go and grab a particular item from a list and view it in different languages. So if I was on a website and I wanted to just kind of toggle between languages, I would be able to do that. Okay, and we'll get to that in a second when we look at some of the front end stuff. Now, Agility not only has content, but we can also specify pages. So if I click into the pages section, you can see here I've got my sitemap in English, and so here's the homepage that it looks like in English. Same deal as with the content. I can switch now to the French language, and now you can see that I've got some interesting icons that are showing up that are telling me what's not translated yet. Okay, so this page has been translated and published in French, but I only have one of the modules that's actually been translated over, and the other two don't show up at all. Okay, and that's okay. It could be that these ones they don't have translations for yet. And you can see I've got a download page or a download folder and an ebook download page here that are not translated, and that could be okay. It's not necessarily a problem. It just means that they're not going to be available in French for that. So this, and then if I want to actually to initialize this page, I would click here, and it'll actually ask me to initialize it when I click on that to set it up in French. So I can go ahead and do that.
Quick question while you're doing that.
Sure.
So for the ones that you haven't translated, will it default to a default language? Can you set up a default language and then will it just default to that?
Yeah, you can't set a so you set a default language in your profile for actually working with the content. So if you're a content editor that likes to work in a specific language, you can set your default language in the settings. However, in the API, there is no default. So it's up to you to specify what you want to set up as the default. And a good example of that is a framework like Next.js, where you actually have to set that up in the configuration of the site when you're creating it in the front end. And then every time you ask for content, you can ask for it in a particular language. So what we've seen a lot of folks do is have, if they're often, most of our customers are from the US, they'll often take English as the default. And then
Right.
and then decide whether they want to show a 404 for a page that doesn't exist in, for instance, Spanish or French, and then decide if they want to revert back to the English. And I've yet to see two customers agree on what the strategy is for that. So everyone has their own kind of how to flip back and forth with languages, but it's a great point and something to consider.
And one extra question. Are you able to enforce translation or is it always optional?
It's always optional at this point in Agility. So so it's up to the content team to decide which content they want to have translated. And sometimes you'll have, especially on a sitemap, you'll have a mirrored sitemap where it has the same. They want to keep the exact same URLs for all the different pages, depending on the language. But sometimes they'll actually want to switch it up and change it up. And so you might have someone who wants to set the page title to match the page name. So I could change this to, I think Akoi is the one there. So you could have it where it's actually a different page name, and it will flip back and forth for you if you need to, because it shares the same page ID. And so you might want to decide, make that decision about how you want to handle the actual slugs, the page slugs.
So all those metadata fields that are built into Agility CMS, they're all localizable.
That's right.
Oh, that's very cool. Yep.
That's right. Yeah, and again, there's always a lot of dissent about whether we should be translating the actual slug or not. So that in a website, whether the URLs should change between languages, and you have the ability to make that decision, and that's up to you to do that. You could also have sections of your website that are only available in one language and not the other, and that's totally up to you to set up as well. It will give you it will let you know, just like it's telling us here, which pages are available in a different language that have not been configured yet.
But based on your experience working with other customers, do you recommend does Agility recommend to translate the slug to the local language, or to keep it all the same?
It depends on your audience. I've found that for sites that are very regional, so for a site that typically, like we have some, we're from Canada, for the sites that are just in Canada, then we tend to keep them the same slugs. But for more international and multinational sites where they're available in places like France, China, the UK and the US and whatever, that those, someone from France really wants to see the URL show up in French. And so it depends on your audience and what you want to do there.
That makes sense. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and definitely understanding your audience is all about this. Okay, so let's look at what this is going to look like in terms of our website on the front end now. So here's the website that I've got as a preview, and I'm previewing the latest changes here for this site, and I'm on the blog page, okay? And you can see this was the item that we looked at, one of the ones I think we translated, travel photography tips. Anyway, this is all showing in English, pretty straightforward. And you can tell there's no language code in the URL here, or nothing in the domain that says this is in English, because this is the default, okay? But if I look at the same site and all I change is adding this little FR into here, the site's written in Next.js using path-based language routing. So what it does is it adds the language code to the front of the path, the locale, I should say, and now that's going to tell Next.js to go and pull the content from the API to build this page in French. And we just translated that item here. So as I reload it, it shows me the French version of this blog post that we just translated. And getting everything translated on the whole site usually means doing, going through all of the content to make sure that it's been translated, to make sure it goes through. So getting that all kind of up to scratch is really important as part of like a pre-launch type of a thing, to go and just view the whole site in the different languages. Now, it's not, because this is a headless CMS. Headless CMS doesn't tell you what to do for your, whether to have a path-based routing or to have domain-based routing to determine your language. So you might have fr.mysite.com or french.mysite.com and not have path-based routing. That has nothing to do with the CMS in particular. That is, for instance, if you're using Next.js as your front end, that's one of the configurations in Next.js. So it's not anything to do with Headless CMS whatsoever. The only thing that you have to specify in Agility is to set up what is your preview URL, which is available in the settings section under sitemaps. Okay, so that just tells you, hey, when I click preview, what site do we want to go to? All right, so we've got the front end websites. Let's dig in now. We're blowing through this content really, really quickly. So if there's anything in the chat, definitely let me know for questions, because there's a lot of different ways to do this.
Yeah. One more question on previews. You said
Sure.
that you would set, when you click on preview, you decide what language to show. Is there a way to have multiple previews? So let's say I want to preview the English and the Spanish and the French version.
Yeah, so what Agility does is when you click preview, it adds the language code as a query string to the end of the URL that you have to implement. !lang equals, I think it adds onto there. So what you have to do is in your front end, set up a redirect to redirect it to however you're handling that language. So there's only one preview URL that